Right, the snare drum is probably the most important drum in our setup, but it's incredible that a lot of us don't really understand about tuning or maintenance. So let's go over to a drum expert, Mark Shaw, who makes custom-made snare drums.
Hi, I'm Mark Shaw. I'm a custom drum maker. Tony's invited me along to tell you a few tips about drum tuning and maintenance. Tuning your drums is not something you do once a year on a rainy Sunday. The more you hit your drums, the quicker they're going to go out of tune. Heads do settle down onto the shelves over time, and if you move your drums often from your practice room to your gig to your bedroom, they'll be encountering different humidities, and they'll naturally swell and shrink slightly and go out of tune. Drummers who play loud and hard may need to retune their kit several times during a gig. Even if you have a lighter touch, you may need to touch up the tuning every few weeks or so. Let's go over to the drums now and have a look at different parts of a snare drum. Okay, for this tutorial we're going to be looking at the snare drum. The snare drum is usually the drum that's hit most, and it consequently goes out of tune quicker than toms or kick drums. Now, tuning a drum is a very involved process because it puts together several different elements. Those elements are the tension of the batter head or the top head, and the tension on the resonant or the snare head, and then of course the relationship between the tension of the top and the bottom heads. Also, another element is the type of head you're using, the type of shell of the drum, and the top batter head. This controls the attack and ring, and the bottom head controls resonance, sustain and overtones. This means that tuning the bottom head is equally as important as tuning the top head. And for your drums to sound good, the general rule is they've got to be tuned evenly. And this means getting an equal note at each of the tuning points or tension rods of the drum. The snare drum is probably the most difficult drum to tune because of the added component of the snare wires stretched across the bottom head. So when you're fitting a new head to the snare drum, on the snare side, you're going to have to untie one side of the snare wires. And depending on the complexity of your snare throw-off mechanism, you can either untie the snare side or the butt side. So when you're changing the bottom head on the snare drum, I would advise taking the rim off, putting the new head on, and when you retie the snare wires, do it first with the throw-off lever all the way up and set the tension adjustment somewhere between very, very tight and very, very loose with the snare wires. Get the bottom head in tune as you want it, and then tighten the snares up using the tension rod adjuster. And this enables you to fine-tune the tension of the snare wires on the snare head. Another thing you want to do is to make sure that the metal plates over the snares are parallel to each other and not twisted or skewed in any way. This will make those expensive snare wires last a good long time. Most of the time you want to tune the snare head tighter than the batter head. This is going to produce a really crisp sound and minimise any unwanted buzz from the snares. You can also adjust a drum's crispness by tuning the tension knob on the snare strainer, which loosens or tightens the metal snares themselves. So if you loosen this too much, the snares are going to start to rattle. If you tighten it too much, the snares are going to start to choke up. And in between these two extremes is a nice crisp sound from the snares. So here are some tips for achieving some good snare drum sounds. First of all, make sure both heads, snare and batter, are in tune with each other. And to do that, you need to get an even tension across the head. Let's move on to this drum now and look at how we do that. When we put a new head on the drum, we want to make sure